13 idolized figures that did terrible things. I mean, it must be just the worst when someone who you thought you looked up to, who you were a fan of, maybe they're an actor or a musician, just completely lets you down, potentially does something criminal and illegal. Just seeing that fall from grace is it's insane.
In a colony he once presided over, many point to a dark legacy.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're discussing 13 figures who are idolized or revered in the West, but were more shady than we make them out to be.
Christopher Columbus was about to discover a new world, and within a few short years, turn a paradise into a hell.
P.T. Barnum.
It's everything you ever want. It's everything you ever need. And it's here right in front of you. This is where you want to be.
P.T. Barnum, also known as the Greatest Showman, was the inspiration for the 2017 Hugh Jackman movie of the same name. The film portrayed him as a champion of those whom society shunned, but in reality, he was the complete opposite. This circus pioneer was an ableist Victorian and the pioneer of freak shows. Many view his treatment of individuals with physical oddities to be exploitative.
Barnum would often present people from non-white ethnic backgrounds as living curiosities, promoting racial othering in his museum. In a similar vein, he presented a black man named William Henry Johnson as a creature known as the What Is It?
For example, his first hoax involved purchasing Joyce Heth, a blind slave, and marketing her as the 161-year-old former nurse of George Washington. He also used exotic animals, which he often mistreated. Despite all these awful practices, he's mythologized as a visionary showman and entrepreneur in Western culture.
Looking back now through a modern-day lens, the magic and spectacle that P.T. Barnum created would rather be seen as xenophobic, cruel to animals, racist, and hateful.
Florence Nightingale.
It's crazy that a movie was made after him. And it came out fairly recently. You would have thought the producers would have, done a bit of research into what he was actually like and stuff. Bit odd.
Because of Florence Nightingale, nursing is one of the most regulated and respected professions in the world.
Florence Nightingale is celebrated as the founder of modern nursing. Her efforts during the Crimean War earning her the title the Lady with the Lamp.
Nightingale returned to England and received a hero's welcome, a medal from Queen Victoria, and a gift of $250,000.
However, she held some extreme views about race and class. She supported the killing of indigenous people under the British Empire, seeing it as a necessary evil to, quote, civilize such cultures. She was a staunch white Christian supremacist, believing other cultures to be inherently inferior. She also supported the miasma theory, which claims bad smells, dirt, and immorality created disease. This means she believed sex workers spontaneously generated illness, which, as we now know today, is an outlandish theory. John A. Macdonald.
Man, it's crazy. This is really a lot of people, when they think of Florence Nightingale, they just think of someone sort of heroic and stuff. But, when you hear about what they actually were like and the beliefs they had, it's just disappointing, really.
Sir John A. Macdonald is called the father of Confederation, but many Canadians feel he should be scorned for policies that profoundly hurt Indigenous peoples.
Canada's first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, is celebrated as one of the nation's founding fathers, but some find him unworthy of reverence. In 1876, he implemented the Indian Act, which aims to assimilate Indigenous peoples and completely control their lives. This system forcibly displaced over 150,000 Indigenous children, placing them in state schools with often terrible conditions.
So he can be seen as a nation builder, but also as a racist.
They were banned from speaking in their native tongues and were regularly mistreated, so much so that many perished. His controversies didn't end there. He was racist toward non-European immigrants, particularly Chinese laborers. He implemented a Chinese head tax to deter Chinese immigration, which would later turn into an outright ban in 1923, 30 years after his death.
Having done 30 years of research into Indigenous history and the relationship between Indigenous people and the Canadian state, he's also the father of the dysfunctional country we live in today.
And I'm sure there's people that are watching this thinking, oh, that's just how they thought at the time. But does that really excuse them for having that attitude? You know, is that an excuse really? Just because, oh, it was more normal to be racist back then? Like, that doesn't really make it kind of okay, does it? Or do you have a bit of sympathy for him and the other people just because, you know, this was prior to things like the civil rights movement and stuff?
Ford.
With the Model T, the most successful car in history, and the groundbreaking $5 a day wage, Ford ushered in the modern world.
Henry Ford founded Ford Motor Company, famous for pioneering affordable cars at the beginning of the 20th century. He also published the Dearborn Independent, which frequently ran harmful anti-Semitic articles.
One of the nation's richest men, he despised the wealthy and feared a vast conspiracy threatened to bring him down.
So he was rich, but he despised the rich. Did he give his money away? I'm guessing not.
These writings were so influential, he gained support from Adolf Hitler, who called Ford an inspiration, mentioned him in Mein Kampf, and had his portrait in his office.
Unreal.
He was also staunchly anti-union, employing a private security force that intimidated and abused workers and used surveillance to suppress labor unions. The Battle of the Overpass in 1937 was the most famous incident, with his security brutally beating union leaders.
Wow.
He also monitored workers' private lives, using inspectors to ensure they followed his strict moral standards. Thomas.
Crazy. Like, people that work for companies that are anti-union or anti-union, for me, I'm just like, how can you possibly be, like, you know, paid time off, sick leave, all of these things were gained by unions. Like, lunch breaks, all from unions. So it's like, when you say you're anti-union, I'm thinking like, mate, but you enjoy all of these things that unions got you. So it's like, it does leave me scratching my head sometimes when, you know, someone who works for some big company that enjoys going home at 5 o'clock or whatever, you know, says that they're anti-union.
Jefferson.
He was part of America's fight for freedom and equality, but were his enlightened principles outweighed by participation in a greater injustice?
Thomas Jefferson is celebrated as a founding father of American democracy, but his beliefs regarding slaves, race, colonialism, and Native Americans fell short of his ideals of liberty. He famously wrote that all men are created equal, yet he owned over 600 slaves throughout his lifetime.
Presented by the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History, lists the names of every slave Jefferson ever owned on a huge wall.
His wealth and extravagant lifestyle were made possible by forced labor, and he took no substantial action towards ending it. His writings also reveal that he believed in the biological and intellectual inferiority of black people.
You have to see him through the lens and through the eyes of his enslaved population.
Like many early Americans, he also encouraged displacing Native American communities, motivating settlers to take indigenous lands across the continent. Henry Kissinger.
Henry Kissinger, America's most consequential and controversial Secretary of State, died last night at the age of 100.
Henry Kissinger was the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor during Nixon and Ford's presidencies. He was a key figure in the Cold War, with some viewing him as an American hero and others as a symbol of imperialism and its disregard for human rights. He opened diplomatic relations with China, but he also played a major role in the Vietnam War, specifically the bombing campaigns in Cambodia, causing massive civilian casualties.
I think it would be hard to find somebody else as comparable as Henry Kissinger in terms of the damage that they have done.
He also supported a coup in Chile in 1973, overthrowing democratically elected President Salvador Allende and beginning a dictatorship. Kissinger also supported Indonesia's 1975 invasion of East Timor, leading to a violent occupation and the deaths of more than 200,000 East Timorese.
Oh my
I think
God.
he does have an inordinate amount of blood on his hands.
Julius Caesar.
I think we should stop interfering. I think countries should just focus on their own countries at this point. Interfering in other countries' politics and stuff should be a thing of the past, I think. It seems to just get more harm than good.
Caesar was a monumental figure in human history. So much so, one of our months is still named after him. He appointed himself dictator for life in 44 BCE during the waning era of the Roman Republic.
Dictator,
is a form of exceptional power that was supposed to be temporary. Caesar is using this as a fig leaf to hide the fact that there are no limits to his influence and power.
He's revered as one of the greatest generals of all time, but his campaigns were brutal, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands. This includes the widespread slaughter of Gallic tribes, which many consider to be a genocide.
They owe me their lives, but the Republic, I am the Republic.
With each success, Caesar's ambitions grow.
Entire tribes were wiped out or enslaved, a level of bloodshed that was even controversial by Roman standards. Now he's remembered as not just a military genius, but as a figure whose ambition laid the groundwork for an empire that would last more than a millennium.
Caesar begins a massive rebuilding of Rome. He builds libraries. He builds a new forum named after him. This building project provides thousands of jobs for Roman citizens and glorifies the city as it has never been glorified before.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Man, it's crazy how, like, he did all of that only to, it's just power. It just seems to corrupt, doesn't it? Like, when someone just gets more and more power or wealth, it just seems to bring out the worst in most people, doesn't it?
Mahatma Gandhi, great symbol of Indian independence, spoke for Hindu India.
Mahatma Gandhi is considered an icon of peace, with a commitment to minimalism, vegetarianism, and self-reliance. He may have adopted this attitude because weapons were unavailable to him. Surprisingly, he once said, quote, "If we had the atom bomb, we would have used it against the British." He also expressed racist views towards black South Africans, referring to them with derogatory language.
He once wrote that white folks, despite their flaws, should be the predominating race in South Africa.
Gandhi is said to have expanded women's rights, but also had misogynist beliefs, believing women should be kept in the home. One of his biggest controversies was sleeping beside young women, including his grandniece, to test his discipline, defending these experiments as a spiritual practice. Thomas Edison.
He counterattacked Tesla's success by launching a brutal smear campaign, one of the nastiest in the history of American industry.
We credit many inventions to Thomas Edison, such as the phonograph, the light bulb, and the motion picture camera. However, many of the inventions credited to him properly should be credited to others. His most notable controversy was his rivalry with Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse during the War of Currents, where Edison advocated for DC, but the other two promoted AC.
Everybody assumed that Edison would get the contract to wire it and to power the first World's Fair powered by electricity. And to everyone's surprise, Westinghouse, using Tesla's patents, won the contract.
Edison employed aggressive tactics to discredit AC, such as publicly electrocuting animals using AC to show its dangers, which...
That's crazy. Oh my God. Just to... Wow, those poor animals.
Can obviously be done with DC. He also treated his employees awfully, alongside pioneering the electric chair. George Washington.
One of the greatest myths.
Gosh, this video, man. So many people that just did things that you'd never think of, because all you hear about is the positive stuff.
About Washington that needs to be dispelled is that he was somehow superhuman.
Washington is the second founding father to make it on our list and probably the most famous. He led the Continental Army to victory in the American Revolutionary War and became the nation's first president. Controversially, he owned many slaves throughout his life, despite expressing conflicted feelings about the practice.
At the time of his death, there were nearly 300 enslaved people living at Mount Vernon.
He also severely mistreated Native American tribes, displacing them and encouraging American expansion into their lands. Furthermore, he sent federal troops to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794, raising concerns about using the military against citizens.
He was already unhappy about anti-federalist activity and dispatched Alexander Hamilton with 15,000 troops to go down to Pennsylvania to put down this rebellion.
Despite this, he remains a symbol of unity for the American people and significantly influenced their founding principles. Mother Teresa.
She was...
Gosh, I wonder if there's going to be any more founding fathers on this list.
A charlatan, pure and simple.
Mother Teresa founded the Missionaries of Charity in 1950, an organization dedicated to caring for the sick, the poor, and the dying. In 1979, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her selfless work. After her death, she was canonized by the Roman Catholic Church, becoming Saint Teresa.
She gave more money to the Vatican Bank than entire countries. The first thing you ask is, what are they doing with the money?
But did you know she harbored some highly controversial views? For instance, she strongly opposed abortion and contraception, saying in her Nobel Prize acceptance speech, quote, "The greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion." Her medical facilities were also accused of being inadequate, sometimes focusing on spiritual preparation for death rather than medical treatment. Teresa additionally associated with controversial figures, like the family of Haitian dictator Francois Duvalier.
I don't believe that there is any human being who doesn't believe in God, unless they are mental.
Christopher Columbus.
Wow, Mother Teresa. I mean, I thought she was someone who was just completely, clean as a whistle, only did good. Wow.
I never liked Columbus.
Columbus is thought to be the first European to explore America since Leif Erikson some 500 years earlier. He set up the first European settlement in America during the Age of Discovery, known as La Navidad.
Christopher Columbus was about to discover a new world, and within a few short years, turn a paradise into a hell.
This marked the beginning of the colonial era, and the start of the end for Native American freedom. His expeditions led to the mass exploitation of native resources and peoples, alongside bringing diseases that ravaged the continent. Columbus enslaved more than 1,000 natives, and 56 years after his voyage, only 500 of 300,000 natives remained on Hispaniola. His voyages were the most impactful in history.
And 500 of 300,000. That is crazy.
While celebrated as a courageous explorer, his actions represent the darker consequences of colonization. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your
I will say this video, man, jeez. Eye-opener.
Phone, make sure you go into settings and switch on your notifications. Winston Churchill.
Winston Churchill is a hero and one of the greatest Britons of all time. But in a colony he once presided over, many point to a dark legacy.
Winston Churchill had such extensive views on race, they have their own Wikipedia page. Covering all his controversies would take multiple videos, but his most famous was the Bengal famine of 1943, which killed 2 to 3 million people.
He is seen actually as the precipitator of mass killing.
America and Canada offered to ship food to Bengal, but Churchill actively refused to provide aid.
That's insane.
Many consider him a white supremacist, with right-wing imperialist and contemporary Leo Amory once saying he didn't see much difference between Churchill's outlook and Hitler's. He slaughtered civilian protesters in Greece, helped cause needless deaths in Ireland, and forced Kenyans into concentration camps. Some considered his famous line, "We shall fight them on the beaches," to have been plagiarized from an Irish Republican who the British hanged and beheaded in 1803. Are there any other controversial Western heroes we forgot to mention? We love to learn, so let us know in the comments section.
At different times, he stated that he wanted to step away from slavery, from being a slaveholder, but for various reasons, he could never make it happen.
Gosh, man, I don't know who I'm most disappointed in. Like, to be honest, like, it's just... Is there a historical figure that, is universally clean and liked? I don't even know if it's possible these days. It's just insane that, the views that some of these people had. Churchill. Churchill here is just completely, almost like a godlike figure. But to hear that he did that in India is just, I can't even believe it. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.